So this whole thing has been about a year in the making. It started at Acts one night when someone said, you guys have talked about sexuality and stuff like that at Antioch, but you've never talked about the issue of homosexuality, and we get so many questions at school about it. I really wish you would address this directly. So I told the young lady to go talk to Lou, and then Lou came to me, and we decided we were going to put this together. But we wanted to do it. If we're going to do it, we could just throw some Bible verses at you and fly at the flagpole and say, okay, you got the marching orders, go for it. But that's not really the way we want to do this. If we were going to do it like in a real Catholic way, we had to zoom back and show you the complete story. Take a little analogy. Can anyone figure out what's going on in this picture? Do you understand what you're looking at here? Do you recognize the context of this picture? Do you guys recognize this? No? Yes? You're seeing maybe a man's nose, maybe an elderly man's nose or something, maybe something? No? Okay. Well, no. What you're looking at there was an excerpt from Don Caravaggio's The Incredulity of St. Thomas, a famous painting of his. And the analogy here is that in order to make sense of that guy's nose, just that little piece of the picture, you have to see the whole picture. And that is roughly what Lou and I were talking about when we were saying how we're going to address this issue of homosexuality, is in order to understand this little sliver of Catholic teaching, all of 2 paragraphs in the Catechism, you have to see the whole picture. Right? So, spoiler alert, we're not even going to actually address homosexuality in this presentation tonight, because we're going to be too busy showing the rest of the tapestry as we zoom in. So, let's start at the beginning. What is a human? We're going to start all the way back there. Because if you don't get this right, you're not going to get much right. Okay? Because if you ask this question out in our society, you're going to get a lot of interesting answers. A human being is not just a material object. Right? We're not just like, you're not a squishy computer that's fueled by bacon. If anyone else thought of Finding Nemo just now, you and I are on the same wavelength. We're squishy. You are not a brain trapped in this, carbon-based transportation system. You're not like a consciousness shoved into a little shell box thing, just floating around up in here with this extraneous thing that moves you around. Okay, you're not just a ghost trapped in a body. Now, what the book of Genesis says is, the Lord formed man out of the clay of the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and so man became a living being. Right? And drawing from that, what the church tells us is that man, though made of body and soul, is a unity. For this reason, man may not despise his bodily life; rather, he is obliged to regard his body as good. The unity of body and soul is so profound that in man there are 2 natures united, when their union forms a single nature. This means that you are not a body, you are not a soul, you are a composite of the 2. You are body and soul, you are spirit and matter, a combination of the 2. Right? Now this actually is far more controversial than you might think. This might sound very basic to you, but this is actually the start of where we disagree with society. Here's why. What the church will tell you is that your body is a real part of who you are. Right? Again, you're not just this consciousness floated in this cage. Your body is a real part of who you are. It speaks truths about who you are as a person. It is the physical manifestation of your personhood. Okay? So, if that's true, and you're born into this body because no one makes your own body. Who gave you your body? God, through your parents. So if you say that the body speaks truths about who you are, then you're admitting that part of your identity is out of your control. It's in God's hands. Right? And if you're wedded to the idea that God should have no say in who you are, then this idea that your body is part of who you are is a problem. And so you have to try to promote one of these other ideas, that either you're just a material object or that you're a consciousness floating in this extra thing. Moving on. So we're both body and soul, a unity of the 2. And the next thing is that we're made male and female. Again, this is right out of the Bible. God made them male and female. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church also says, man and woman were made for one another. He created them in community to be to be a community of persons, in which one be the helping of the other, for they are equal as persons, complementary as masculine and feminine. Again, this is something that's actually controversial. There are people who would say that this idea of people being made male and female is an outdated, how do I say it, bigoted statement of ancient people who don't know any better. People would say, well, look, these days we know about things like XXY chromosome syndrome. We know about people who have ambiguous genitalia when they're born. We know that some people don't fit this mold. Therefore, how can we say that people are born male and female? Well, imagine this. If you ask a random person on the street, how many fingers does a human have? Right? They would say, well, 10, 5 on each hand, right? Well, of course, I mean, if he doesn't know how to count, he might say 8. But if a person, if you ask your normal person, you'd say 5 on each hand. Right? Well, imagine another person comes up and says, well, my nephew, he was born with 6 fingers on his right hand. Polydactyly, if you've ever heard that. Well, does that disprove the notion that humans have 10 fingers on their hands? No. It just means that you recognize that polydactyly is a birth defect. You recognize that there is a ordinary human form, and if you have 6 fingers on your hand, you deviated from that. It's nothing against you personally as like a moral fault, but it just means that there's a difference between birth defect and the ordinary human pattern. And so the ordinary human pattern is male and female, and there is the possibility of birth defects that interrupt that. In fact, it's actually mentioned in the Bible as that there is defects that can alter that. So Matthew chapter 19, for it. So this is just another controversial thing the church teaches, that yes, male and female is a real thing, and it's part of our bodies, it's part of our nature. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the human condition. Now that we've talked about what a human is. Starting with another question. Why is it that utopias never work? All right, you know what utopia is? Utopia is an attempt at creating a perfect society. Basically, wipe the slate clean, we'll go someplace, get a bunch of people together and try to make things perfect, right? Why do those never work, right? As you look through history, whether it's the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, or Oneida City, New York, every single attempt at making a utopia fails miserably. Sometimes hilariously, sometimes deadly, right? In the case of the Soviet Union, we're talking, 100 million people died for the sake of that one, okay? Why is it that large and small, you can't have a utopia? And why is it that even in our personal lives, we're always having to deal with things like selfishness and rudeness and brokenness? Why is it this is just an assumed part of the human experience that we just can't get away from? Well, in the words of G.K. Chesterton, who is this awesome English writer, and I say English as in, he's from England, he's sort of like the Catholic version of C.S. Lewis, only he's a bit more fun. If you've ever had the opportunity to read some of his work, you'll find yourself thinking this: one of us is insane, and I don't think it's him. Only one other person who I've read, has that effect on me, and that's Jesus Christ. But G.K. Chesterton is a crazy, crazy man. You just have to experience his writing. But he said, looking over all human history, he says, it seems as if we're all in the same boat, and we're all seasick. That's the general. That's how he compared humanity. So why are we messed up? Well, again, back to the Bible. I know, isn't this awkward that I have to do this? Oh well. Well, I probably don't need to remind you of the story from Genesis, how the Bible starts out. After, God gets done telling you about how He made everything, He gets to telling you about this problem of the human condition. We are created in God's friendship, and then you have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which the Catechism says represents the knowledge of good and evil. It represents the insurmountable obstacles we face as human beings, the moral obstacles, the law of God written on our heart that we're not to transgress, that we need to respect. Okay? And when God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the garden, not to eat from the knowledge of good and evil, what that means is don't experience evil in your lives. Don't bring it upon yourself. Don't choose evil. And of course, we all know that subsequently happened to all our first parents. That, as it says, their eyes were opened and they knew they were naked. The man and woman hid themselves from God. The Catechism remarks on saying, in that sin, man preferred himself to God and by the very act scorned him and chose himself over God, and they became afraid of God. Right? And that wasn't just their problem. That was a problem that's passed down to all humanity. As Paul says in the letter to the Romans, through the disobedience of one man, we were all made sinners. The Catechism says, his sin affected human nature is a state which is transmitted by propagation to all mankind. By the transmission of human nature, deprived of original holiness and justice. So there's consequences of the fall for all humanity. Not just for Adam and Eve, but for all its lasting effects that all humanity is born under. And this is the consequences of the fall. In the Council of Trent, the Catechism, or the Catholic Church enumerated the problems of the fall, the problems that we inherit as part of our fallen human nature. And those are the weakening of the will, the darkening of the intellect, and the disordering of our passions. All right, so now we're going to talk about what each one of those mean. The weakening of the will. I probably don't even need to explain what this is about. Maybe you guys have had this experience. You go home and you're like, all right, I'm going to have dinner. After dinner, if I just study for like an hour and a half, do my homework right away, I can have leisure time for the rest of the evening, I can go to bed on time, wake up tomorrow, everything will be great. You know what you need to do, right? But of course, what do you end up doing? I'll tell you in my case, what you do is you eat dinner, and then you go play video games or relax or do something like that until about 9 o'clock at night, at which point you say, I need to do my homework. And then you get about half of it done, and then you go to bed after probably doing more leisure time after that. You said to yourself, well, I got to start on it. Right? And then, the next morning, if you go to Carmel, maybe you get in early, you go to Greyhound Station, and you quickly pump out the rest of that homework before class starts. And so why is it, as you look back, you're like, Plan A was much better than Plan B. Right? Plan B does not have me running to class, like holding my papers like this. Right? So why is it that we can't do that? Well, that's the weakening of the will. You know what's good, but you can't bring yourself to do it. In my personal case, this is my personal weakening of the will right here. Back in college, I did my own shopping. The first time in your life you're doing your own food shopping. And I would say to myself, every single time I went to Walmart, I would say, this time will be the time when I don't pick up Smart Food popcorn or puffed Cheetos. And every single time I would practically wake up next to the empty bag at my desk, and I'm just like, I did it again! Why can't I stop myself? And I got to be a much, much, much bigger fellow in college. In fact, there came a point where my doctor was literally like, you're going to die. Keep this up. I'm not kidding you. I wish I was. My cholesterol was the type of cholesterol that no man on the age of 25 should have. But anyways, in the words of St. Paul, I do not understand my own actions, for I do what I do not want, but I do the very thing I hate. That's the weakening of the will. Alright, the darkening of the intellect. This is my mascot for the darkening of the intellect. That is a use scam. Perhaps you've had this experience. Maybe you work retail, maybe you just had to wait behind someone in line, but you watch a person, even as the soothing sounding voice walks you through the process, scan the item, put it in that, next item, right? And you encounter that person who's like, I cannot handle this! How do you do it? I look twice! What do I do? And if I go right to left? No, put your face on it! Right? Then you've encountered that person the use scan is just too much. It's just too much. Right? If you've encountered that, and you will when you get to college, when you start doing your own shopping, college kids they all use the use scans. But you will find yourself trapped behind a person where the use scan is simply a bridge too far. And that is the darkening of the intellect. But in your personal life, perhaps you've encountered, Calculus 1, and the step too far for you is trying to find the area underneath the sine curve. which, by the way, would be the integration of sine, which is cosine. Anyways, we don't have to get into that tonight. But anyway, so maybe you've just had trouble with that. You've never been able to understand why it is that, like the smart kid next to you, can understand it, but you can't understand it. Well, again, that's the weakening of the darkening of the intellect. Right? It means that we can't grasp things as fast as we should. Okay? The last point is the disordering of the passions. Now, what you are seeing there is my mascot for the disordering of the passions. That is a donut burger. Okay? That is right. Okay. Now, of course, there is no good reason on God's green earth why a donut burger should exist. Okay? There's just no good reason for that. After asked where they sell it, one of the parents asked that too, actually. You just Google donut burger, you'll find real restaurants that offer this. And the only reason why they would offer this is because someone thought it was a good idea, and someone somewhere is ordering this and consuming it. And it stands as a monument to the disordering of passions because it means we want things that aren't good for us. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about really for the rest of this presentation, is the disordering of passions, understanding what that even means. Right? Because that's not a typical phrase you hear, disordering of the passions. That sounds like, church speak. Right? It sounds like some sort of philosophical stuff. Well, Catholics have two sources for moral truth. We have revelation, which includes Bible and sacred tradition, which is passed down from us from the apostles, and either by written form or by oral teaching. But we also have natural law and natural philosophy. Okay? That would include things that even non-Christians come up with. So, for instance, a lot of our natural law philosophy, our natural moral philosophy, is actually based off of Greek philosophy. It's actually based off of Aristotle and Socrates. And actually, that is what we're going to be talking about for the rest of tonight, is actually the Church's natural moral law. Because the Bible, as great as it is, doesn't cover every possible circumstance. It just is not like the big book of everything that includes every single question you could ever ask. So you have to use your mind, you have to use reason if you're going to fill in the gaps. And that's where natural law and natural philosophy comes in. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to introduce you. You're not going to be able to pass a master's program at the end of tonight, but I'm going to introduce you to just the vocabulary and the concepts of the Church's natural law. All right, so let's talk about what ordered means. Let's talk about what ordered means. I mentioned the disordering of passions. All right, so what does ordered mean? All right. Well, ordered means is the ordered use of something is the use that points to the nature of its design and the good that it was meant for. In layman's terms, it means what it's meant to do. Okay. By the way, this don't be too intimidated by the fact that this is called like natural law philosophy. It's basically common sense using technical language. Right? That's all you really need to know. The ordered use of something means what it's meant for. You can tell what it's meant for by its design, and therefore you can tell what it's meant for. All right, so real quick example. What is the ordered use of a coffee cup? Mary Carmen, can you help me out here? What's the ordered use of a coffee cup? What's a coffee cup meant for? Yeah, drinking coffee out of it. Let's round of applause. Okay, really quickly, Mary Carmen, you're not on the woods yet. How can you tell that that's what it's meant for?
It's named coffee.
Okay, it's named coffee cup. Alright, what about maybe its design can tell you that it's meant for drinking coffee out of?
It's got a handle,
yeah.
And it's most likely made out of rare material.
Yep. I am so glad you mentioned thermal conductivity. I was like, I really hope someone mentions thermal conductivity tonight. You did it. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. Okay. But yeah, she's right. It's got a big basin that you can fill it with a liquid. It's got a handle, so it's meant for drinking. So you don't want to put it's not meant for. We'll get into what it's not meant for later. And it's made out of ceramic material, which has low thermal conductivity, which means it's good for hot things. I'm so proud of you. Okay, what is the ordered use of a TV? Yeah, watching stuff. Okay? Look, we're using a TV right now, and you're watching stuff on it. Okay? So that is the ordered use of a TV. Okay. The disordered use of something points away from the nature of its design and inhibits the good it was designed for, and is often destructive to itself or what it's used on. Okay? So, layman's terms, what it's not meant for. You look at someone using something and you're like, that's not what it's for. You're using that all wrong. Okay? Alright, so can someone name me a disordered use of a coffee cup? Go ahead.
Kill somebody with it.
Yeah, you can use it as a weapon. You can. It would make for it would break, and it would break the other person, but you could use it as a disordered use of a coffee cup. That's not what it's meant for. Pastor, what do you got? You could put a kitten in it. Yeah, you can put a kitten in your coffee cup. Wait, this is serious, people. This is serious.
Serious kitten talk right here.
Yeah. Because if you do put the kitten in it, the kitten might poop, right? And then you don't want to use that coffee cup anymore. Okay? So the disorder use of a TV, right? Alright, you're not going to use a TV to like shingle your house. You're not going to use it as a ramp, to put your car up on.
Scratch an itch on your back.
Scratch an itch on your back, right? My boy tries to use it as like a finger painting thing every now and then. That's no good. That's a distorted use of a TV, right? Okay. What does this have to do with human morality? Right? What is all this stuff about coffee cups and TV stuff and finding out the use of something have to do with human morality? Right? Well, it depends on how you look at humanity. Right? The reason why you could tell what the ordered use of those things was because you could see the hand of a designer in it. You could see the nature of something. You can tell what it's meant for, and you can tell, therefore, how it ought to be used. But that's all dependent on the idea that it's designed. There's some sort of intentionality built into it. So, if you view humanity as just the offspring of, blind chance that had no prevision of the end it was achieving, that were just the meaningless, byproducts of natural things, there's no God, there's no plan for humanity, then all we've been talking about has nothing to do with morality, because there is no ordered purpose for human freedom, because there's no design. Okay, but if we were intended by God, we were designed by God, either through a fast process or a slow process. We don't need to get into evolution tonight, but if we were in some way intended by God and built by God, then there would be an ordered use of human freedom. That's to say, there would be something that we're meant to do. There's an intended use for our minds and bodies. And when humans live selflessly and according to reason and the will of God, that's called virtue. That's the ordered use of human freedom is called virtue. The ordered use of human freedom is called virtue. Alright? But I mentioned the disordering of our passions is one of the consequences of the fall. That means that our fallen nature leads us to desire things which are unreasonable, that are contrary to virtue, and move us away from God. These are things that we're attracted to that we know can never make us happy because they are against the nature of our design and what we're intended for, among which is the donut burger. Okay? Because if you eat too many of those, the harm is obvious. We call those disordered desires, those disordered passions, temptations. Alright, that's surely you've heard that word before. If you've never heard disordered desire before, temptations is the normal word for that. Okay? So we're attracted to all kinds of things that are honestly bad for us. We want fame, right? We want the esteem of other people. We want to base our worth on what other people think of us. We want to base the meaning of our life on the things that we own. We want to base our security off of how much money we have, right? And there's also things that we're drawn to, like revenge. We want to get back on anyone who's ever done anything bad to us. We want to let loose our anger and show people, how powerful we are and how, we need to get our way. Right? We have lust, right? And we have jealousy. We want things simply because other people have them. Right? And these are all disordered desires. These are contrary to virtue. They're contrary to what we're made for. And when we give in to these temptations, it's of course called sin, which shouldn't be news to you. All right? Now, question, is it a sin to feel temptations? Is it a sin to have disordered desires? No. Right? No. The answer is no. If there was a clicker, this would work a lot better. But the answer is no. It's only a sin when you act on disordered desires with your free will, and you move your will away from goodness and away from God, and choose that lesser good over the greater good of virtue. Right? Everyone's got temptations. Everybody's got something. My wife could tell you that under the right situations, I have anger problems. It's like a caged animal, and just every now and then, I just get angry, and I say things that don't mean and stuff like that, and afterwards I have to really apologize hard. That's just a disordered passion that I have, is the desire to just let loose on people when under the right provocation. All right. So maybe some of you are thinking, well, we're talking about sin. We're talking about recognizing sin. We're talking about seeing it and saying, that's a sin, that isn't. Didn't Jesus tell us not to judge? Okay. Well, yeah, he did. But when he said that, he did not mean be morally indifferent. Right? Because there's only one type of person who's truly morally indifferent. There's only one type of person who sees things and doesn't recognize the moral status of it. And we call those people sociopaths. Right? But in reality, you think about all the times that you recognize right from wrong. For instance, in the news recently, there was a fellow who was buying an air rifle at a Walmart, and someone saw him and called the cops on him because they thought that he looked suspicious because he was holding an air rifle, right? And the police came and they said in their police report that they asked him to drop the weapon 5 times, and he refused to drop the weapon and moved aggressively towards them, and they opened fire on him and shot him dead. Well, then Walmart released a camera, like the video of what happened, and they basically, as soon as they saw him, they shot him dead. So the police lied. Right? They fabricated a story to cover their own butts. And you hear about that and you just get angry because you're like, oh my gosh, that's an injustice. Right? Well, that's precisely what it means to recognize sin for what it is. You recognize, real problems. You recognize things when people do things wrong. Another instance, I was at a park with my boy James, and there was a man there who seemed like a really, really nice guy. He had 6 children, and he just kind of had this lost look on his face. So I got to talking to him, and the reason why he was so down in the dumps is because his wife had just left. He seemed like a really nice guy. He had 6 kids, and his wife just left. And I was like, wow, that's a real wrong thing to do, it seems. Okay? But what this does mean, you shall not judge. It means you are not the judge of anyone's soul. It means you do not stand in the judgment seat over anybody. Not even the worst of people. Not even those cops who fabricated the story. You can't see into their hearts. You can't, even if you really detest what they did, you can't see into their hearts. You can't say what motivated them. You can't say what is their status before God. You can't do that. Even when it's really tempting. When we're really sure that we're right, it's so tempting to put yourself up there on the judgment seat of God and to cast your fury down on people and tell people what they deserve. But that is precisely what Jesus tells us we can't do. No matter how bad a thing that we see a person doing, we cannot judge that person's soul. We can recognize evil where it is, but we cannot say, you're a bad person, you deserve this, and so on and so forth. Right? And the reason why is because, back to G.K. Chesterton, we're all in the same boat. We're not meant to be hitting each other with paddles. We're meant to be paddling together. We're all in the same team here. We're all in the same boat. We're all seasick. We're meant to be helping one another, not judging one another. Okay? Because all of us are in the same situation with the fall, with disordered passion, temptation, with sin. We're all in this together. And we all have the same command from Jesus, which is, if any of you want to be my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. And that's actually the end of the first presentation here. Okay, anyone have anything in more detail that they think that they can share about an instance where they're being judgmental? Go ahead, buddy.
Like if you're judging someone by their actions.
Yeah.
Say that person shouldn't have been out here doing something like that.
Right.
And someone says, hey, you shouldn't say that. Say that.
Right, exactly. So that's a great example. So someone's out drinking, someone's out, partying, getting drunk. Maybe they even drive home drunk, right? And you say that's really wrong. People get hurt, people get killed. The whole issue about that's breaking the law aside, and someone says to you, "Hey, man, you can't judge." Well, actually, you're a rational, thinking human being, so you can judge the difference between right and wrong. Right? We do it all the time. We do it when someone cuts us off in traffic, right? But there's a difference between saying that person did something wrong and that person sucks. That person is a bad person, right? Yeah. All right. Another question I wanted to ask was, we have the beginning part of this presentation was all about the fall. It was all about the biblical story of the fall. All right. So our outlook on humanity is that we're kind of born with this inbuilt problem called the fall and distorting passions. All right. Now put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't share that assumption. All right. How might that change their outlook, you suppose, on humanity? If our outlook says you're born with some problems built in, if you don't share that assumption, what kind of view might you have instead? Brian, go ahead.
I don't think like anything even does is okay if you just don't want to.
Yeah. Can you expand that a little bit more?
Well, like, if it's like they're completely willing it themselves, like it's not like anything disordered or like anything wrong, it's just like what they want.
Right. So you're basically...
So repeat what Brian said, because can you all hear what Brian just said? Yeah. So repeat what his first one.
So what Brian said was, if you're not starting with the assumption that we desire things that are bad for us, which is the consequence of the fall, then basically if a person wants something, you can only assume that that's just what they're meant to want, and that's good for them. Right? This plays in. Does everyone understand that distinction? Is that we're born, we start off thinking it's natural for us to desire things that are not good for us. If you don't share that assumption, you're starting off saying, well, whatever it is we want is what you're meant to want. So it's all good. That's what Brian's saying. And that's a huge difference in the way you look at things. An example. My last name is O'D. Irish. There's an Irish side of my family that where alcoholism is an issue. Okay? And there is a genetic problem, there's a genetic linkage with alcoholism. Right? I am basically born with a predisposition towards alcoholism. Okay? Does that mean that alcoholism is good for me? Well, if you accept the idea that there is no disorder of passions, that however it is you're born wanting something, that's what you're meant to have, well, there's no principled reason to say that my desire for alcoholism is bad. But if you're a Catholic and you recognize that we're kind of born a little bent, then you can say, well, yeah, of course, you're born wanting something that's not necessarily good for you. Okay? Let's see.
How many questions do you have?
5. Okay. There are some Christian groups, we don't have to name names, but they would tell you that it's not enough simply to resist temptations. Right? That if you're going to really be right with God, you have to even get rid of the temptation. Right? Is that what we believe? If someone presented that to you, what would you say back? Yes, go ahead.
Well, the Bible with Jesus,
Yeah.
he was also tempted, like in the desert,
Mhm.
like for 40 years, but so like God tempted.
That's a great point. So if being tempted by something means you're out of step with God, then Jesus would be out of step with God, which makes no sense. That's a brilliant point. Right? Okay, so yeah, that's the truth, is that it is enough simply to resist temptation. It might be that over time temptation, like, it becomes dulled. It goes from high volume to low volume over time as you get yourself into the habit of resisting it, and that's good. But in order to get yourself right with God, you don't have to rid yourself of every temptation you feel. All that's asked of you is that you resist temptation, not that you get rid of it. But can you imagine what harm it would do to a person who's struggling with a persistent temptation if that's in their mind, that the very fact that they're feeling that means they're not right with God? Can anyone, how would that make you feel if you were in that situation being told that the very fact that you feel a temptation means you're out of step with God? How would that make you feel? I just...
I feel like that'd be really hard because temptations are really easy to control. And so you can't help that you feel that. And so it's you kind of like part of yourself a lot.
Right, you're driving bonkers, right? You're asking God, you're praying, God, please heal me of this temptation. Heal me, I don't want this anymore. God, watch, over a long enough period of time, how do you think you would feel about God?
But I feel like anything that God is listening to your prayers, but maybe this is something that God is doing for a reason, but if you want to
Yeah. Exactly. So what she's saying is that if you honestly believe that in order to be right with God, you got to even get rid of the temptation, you're praying like, oh God, I don't want to feel this anymore, I don't want to be tempted this way anymore, it just doesn't happen. Well, you might think that God hates you or something. You might feel rejected by God. And that's where, real, true Christian doctrine actually makes a huge difference. People will talk about how there's no real difference between, this Christian group over here, this Christian group over here. They all love Jesus, so what's the difference? Well, bad theology can actually really, really hurt people. And so what matters is that all the church asks you is that you resist temptations. And if you still feel it, you can pray for it to be gone, but don't think it's got to be gone before you're right with God. Because God doesn't ask that of you. He'll give you the grace to resist temptation, but it may always be there. And that's just the human condition.